thank the VMFT, Dr. Sajida Bashir, and of course, Professor Dilip Menon for this absolutely immersive experience for the last 2 days. And nothing can be more fulfilling for me than to find a knowledge site like this where there is no fear of expressing our thoughts. And I think to that extent, I owe the stage and a lot of thoughts to our reading and rereading of Vakkom Moulavi, who continues to inspire us in geographies that are distant, not proximate, but the imaginaries of geography and ideas help us move on. And, I'm going to, of course, find an opportunity, to talk about other parts of India that were not princely states, so to say. And I find that opportunity in 2 different ways. Of course, by looking at social reforms, but more importantly, the themes of this seminar of tradition, dissent, and dialogue, they continue to inspire you to do comparisons in very different sort of ways, to do comparisons that are not structural, institutional, but whether agencies, experiences, and ideas can form for comparative frames within the larger Indian subcontinent. And then, of course, there's a methodological advance. Can we go to the next slide? And that methodological advance, of course, as I have said, it's inspired by the themes of tradition, dissent, and dialogue. But I address these themes from physical sites of universities in India, and I find them to be unique institutional actors embedded in history and society. Now, what was this history? This is a history of colonial domination and control. And what is the society that we talk about? The society that we talk about is a society with diversity, poverty, and entrenched inequality. So our university, even as they are symbols of modernity in a particular way, but they are institutions of society within this overarching frame of understanding of our history as colonialism imbued with domination and control, and a society which is largely described as this. Now, universities have been and continue to be important arenas where it is possible for a reconsideration of our understanding of social reforms as dissent and or dialogue with tradition. And all of this is possible in the arena, the physical space of the university. Now, our understanding of modernity in its non-linear trajectories, adopting alternate pathways in colonial and post-colonial societies is also made possible if we look at universities as physical sites. Now, I choose 2 such institutions, the University of Mysore. Of course, that for this talk today becomes only what is referred to as an implicit comparator. I'll come back to it in the questions or if there are comments or towards the end. I won't do so much of a this to that matching comparison, so to say, which is a mechanical comparison, but I will use the Mysore experience only as a framework of ideas and come back to it towards the end. What I'm going to really talk about is the University of Patna, and what I find is that understanding both as actors embedded within a public sphere, that helps us to understand the wider ramifications of university life as a site of experience, as a site where dissent and dialogue were both possible. Now, what I illustrate this with are, of course, historical data and narratives from the University of Patna. It's a technique that I evolved as I was doing the history of the University of Mysore. History as seen from within life experiences of alumni who were in their late 90s. In fact, by the time I finished the study and the paper went to press in a feshrift for James Maynard, we also lost a lot of them. But this was the University of Mysore experienced as Maharaja's College, and the experience of his alumni as theatre persons, as historians, as economists, as journalists, as filmmakers. Now we come back to do the same with respect to the University of Patna. Now my arguments with historical data and memory bring to the fore what is the unanticipated. And what is this unanticipated? That is especially with reference to the contemporary, hegemonic, and authoritarian construction. So history for me is an experimental way of understanding institutions, understanding ideologies, understanding practices of people with intellect, and that's what we do. Now, what does this contemporary construction do? There is, of course, a typecasting of Islam and Muslim cultural practices and Muslim nobility. They're all seen as irrelevant to modernity. Now, Muslims are seen as bearers of tradition and acting within bounded domains. Now, what the stories of mainly the Patna University here, but also the Mysore University will bring out is absolutely counterintuitive to the current construction. And this current construction of the, the ideal type of which I presented before you, we go beyond that and delve into the history of these universities and bring to the fore some of the invisible and perhaps also what is being deliberately ignored in the present. Can we go to the next one? Now, since I've told you that we'll be at the site of the Patna University. Now, I know you're all fortunate and lucky enough to have the imagination of an ocean. Now, this is the Patna College where the Patna University later begins. Even in Mysore, the university actually begins at the Maharaja's College, which was the Maharaja's free high school. Now, this was a Dutch spice godown, and it's on the banks of the Ganges. And the Ganges was used as the way to take all the spices away to the larger ocean. And we were also suppliers of labor to what was developing as colonial mercantile trade. And it's featured very well in Amitabh Ghosh's Imaginaries of the Ocean. So this is the river where the university starts. This is the building. It starts with donations from Maharajas. Remember always, Patna and Bihar were non-princely state areas. But even here, the university, which is later described in history as a colonial construct, a gift of the British, actually starts with donations from the nobility, of which the maximum donations came from an unknown Muslim nobleman who lived in the older parts of the city, the Patna city. And I've been at pains to find out the names. Hopefully in some time I will have some. What I'm also going to do, can we move to the next slide? Yeah, I'm going to talk about this person who becomes the first Indian Vice Chancellor of Patna University. This is Sir Syed Ahmad Sultan. He is one of the Muslim noblemen, an eminent lawyer, writes a lot on law and is an important member of the High Court of Patna. Interestingly, both the High Court and the university were demands of Purn Swaraj from the Biharis as articulated in the journal Bihari and not a gift of the British. But much less about Sir Syed Ahmad Sultan and much more about a relative who will come soon. Now, this is the important figure that I will talk about. This is Professor Fanindra Bhushan Ganguly, scientist and principal of Patna Science College. These are his birth and death dates, and that's him with his family there. Now, he's an MSc from Allahabad, a doctorate which starts at Humboldt, but his supervisor, one day he discovers as he's walking out of his lab at, in the dark of night, he finds a group of people standing around a body lying in a pool of blood. And that was his supervisor who had been pushed from the heights of Humboldt to lie in a pool of blood to death. And then, of course, he flees to England, to Imperial College London. His research is in these areas. There's Achyut there, he'll understand more. Now, his education at Humboldt ends in a tragedy. He doesn't speak much, but has a very important formative influence on him. After completing his PhD at the Imperial College, he joins the Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore. It's the Vice Chancellor of Calcutta University who persuades Fani Bhushan Ganguly and says, Patna is emerging as a very important center for sciences, and please go and join the Patna University, which Fani Bhushan Ganguly does. Now, most equally important was his work, which is not discussed much, in the literary and cultural public spheres, and I will come to it as I present a little more. Now, that's Fani Bhushan Ganguly. He is heading the Indian National Science Congress. This is at his alma mater at the steps of the Moore College in Allahabad. The person circled there is Fani Bhushan Ganguly. And as you can see, there's Jawaharlal Nehru there. Also Sarojini Naidu, the poet, who's sure to be present at these conferences. And an earlier conference held in Patna, there's also we have CV Raman, Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar, Govind Vallabh Pant, and many more who Rajan Harshe, the former Vice Chancellor of Allahabad University, has promised to me that he'll identify all the other figures. But till then, just enjoy the image as it is. But most important is this lady figure who's a relative of Sir Sultan and diverges completely in her politics with Sir Sultan himself. Lady Imam did not have the good fortune of being able to study at the Patna University. Now, she's a social reformer right outside the boundary of the university, but becomes an advocate for women's higher education and joins hand with the Bengali and Kayast women who the British were trying to marginalize through the partition of Bihar and Bengal. She joins hands with them and then argues for industrial education for women. She also remains a very important promoter for Urdu education. Sajida was asking a question about participation in the political sphere. Lo and behold, you will see that she participates very actively in all the Congress movements, becomes a Gandhian. She participates in the non-cooperation movement. She and her daughter were important for doing the anti-liquor picketing for that movement. By the civil disobedience movement, she's rustled up a crowd of 3,000 women in the city square of Patna. And around the civil disobedience movement, the British are finally forced to issue an arrest warrant around her. She also fights the election to the provincial assembly. Unlike her cousin, Sir Sultan, who I will not talk about much, he was nominated through the Chamber of Princes and went through that nomination to the Round Table Conference. She was taken as a Congress nominee to the same Round Table Conference. So not much discussed. On the inaugural day of our very important conference, we had Rakshanda ji who was here and she asked me, I said, I will present about Lady Imam. She says, oh, there was this important novelist she had as a friend. Now, Lady Imam's best friend, Rashidun Nisa, became the first woman novelist who wrote a novel in Urdu. So that's the good company that she kept. Her daughter became, of course, a champion of all this. But where I put together the themes of this conference of tradition, dissent, and dialogue in Patna is in the conversations that I have gathered that happened finally between Lady Imam, her building of a modern public sphere in Bihar, and she has a dialogue with Fani Bhushan Ganguly in the personal quarters of the principal of Patna Science College. I've gathered elements of this conversation that happened within the veil of a parda dividing the male Dr. Fani Bhushan Ganguly and the female Lady Imam and the wife of Fani Bhushan Ganguly sitting on the other side. This happens at the height of imperial power being exercised on Bihar around the 1942 Quit India movement. And as you're aware, Bihar suffered particularly during the 1942 Quit India movement. The protests were very important. Now, she also patronizes Urdu, and Urdu becomes a site of a public culture for criticism and dissent. Now, what happens as a lot of what happens in Urdu and dissent and the struggle for democracy is that even in a declining public university, it's the language Urdu that keeps alive a public culture of criticism and dissent, especially in what is known as the Patna Kalam, of which few know much about. In Patna itself, it's referred to in vernacular terms. And a lot of you who may have heard Bihari speak, you will find them stretch that word a bit. So Patna becomes Patnahiya and the Kalam becomes Zuban. So I will end what I have to say with a couple of verses from this, the Patnahiya Zuban, that is written at the height of the Quit India movement. And the Patnahiya Zuban then, it goads young men and women to think about death as a romance of life, that as a form of dealing with life itself as a parda. So this is what I'm going to do. And so in case I'm asked to stop anywhere, I've already told you what I'm going to do. So wherever I finish with time, I just have a poetry to tell you. And I can do that very quickly, I promise. So maybe we can just sit on some still images and I'll just tell you that, what I unearthed through this whole thing of, traveling from Mysore to Patna, it's an idea experiment. It's not an actual travel that happens. There are no real connects, remember, between Mysore and Patna, except that men of science were being attracted by Bangalore, then rising up as a center for science. There are real connections that happen between Patna and Hyderabad, but it ends there. In fact, Sir Sultan refuses the offer of the Nizam of Hyderabad to become a prime minister there. He continues to serve the Patna University. Sir Sultan also refuses the offer of Jinnah to become a member of his cabinet. And he says, Yahi zameen ast, yahi zameen ast. And when Sir Sultan dies, the most flowering tributes to Sir Sultan are paid in Pakistan by those who had migrated from the regions of Gaya and Pali, which was his village. We heard the name of the Pali language. That's where he comes from. And in the Pali language, then a lot of tributes flow into Sir Sultan. So those, of course, are stories that happen. But what we understand through all this is that the universities, even though they were set up in adverse circumstances of colonial domination and control, they turn out to be sites of plural culture. In Bihar itself, the whole ploy of the British was to divide, as you know, Bengal into East Bengal and West Bengal. It's a much well-known story of history, that the idea was that this would be also a sort of Hindu-Muslim division of East and West Bengal. The partition of Bengal finds its final fruition in the partition of the University of Calcutta, when two universities are formed. One is Calcutta University, the other one is Patna University. So while the East and West Bengal story becomes the more important story of political sovereignty, this little story of the formation of Patna University, which was opposed in the Senate of Calcutta University on many different grounds, that remains understudied. And that's where we are going to locate the story and sail on. Now, this also allows us to move and counter historiography that puts an exclusive focus on the role of rulers, especially princely rulers, as embodiments of the Oriental modern, and celebrated often in policy literature on good governance in India. Now, these models of the benevolent king have been advanced here and there, including by economists, and they are presented as the modern progressive, especially giving to them, to their illiterate agricultural subjects, the gift of modern education and advancing them to modern citizenship. Relatedly also, the divans have been venerated mostly as bringing in ideas of the modern amongst traditional citizenry, and especially the divans who rotate amongst the various princely states, of which Diwan Mirza Ismail is a great example. He was Diwan in Mysore, Jaipur, and Hyderabad. Diwan Madhav Rao, whose stories you know very well. In policy literature, this has been referred to either as policy diffusion or policy feedback. Robin Jeffrey does this for Travancore. Now, a fuller understanding of the role of the benign king, which I contest very much, or the Divan as the source of modernity, comes with the understanding we have of Vakkom Moulavi. And this leads us to appreciate much more the role of dissent and free speech in advancing good governance, including social and educational reforms. So Lady Imam's story will be a story similar, though not as spectacular as the efforts of Vakkom Moulavi. Now, the benefits of what the Vakkom Moulavi did, and as I understand through my readings of the Swadesha Abhimani, are that the letters and the articles on the directors of public instruction or about how badly the examinations were being conducted, the benefits of these were not meant for any particular community. These were about the public good and creating models of public accountability as central elements of good governance. So, constituting the idea of dissent and free speech as central and integral to educational reforms also allows us to move beyond the hard difference in Indian historiography on princely ruled states and non-princely ruled states. The argument has been advanced with respect to Mysore by James Maynard, Manu Bhagwan and Janki Nair, amongst others, that the princely states had some degree of autonomy from direct British rule, and that this could be called some form of a mediated rule. And this autonomy was in fact used for good governance. On the other hand, permanent settlement areas such as ours were seen to be directly under the control of the British, and the university was understood as an act of colonial control in works of David Boyk at Berkeley. Now, the destructive plan of partition of Bengal only confirms that yes, we were in fact plundered in many ways, not just by the permanent settlement, but also in terms of our imaginaries of the rational. Now, it was simply a colonial ploy also to dissociate the poor Bihari peasant caste and classes from their intellectual association with the Bengalis. So, as I have spoken about earlier, this was a ploy, and the Bengalis understood the plan to bifurcate Calcutta University in exactly as many words, a plan to destroy the University of Calcutta. The Senate argued that this is a cut and paste, scissors and gum exercise. Many also said this would inflate the numbers of underqualified people for jobs. By this time, Chakri itself was becoming a huge issue in Calcutta, and this issue of urban unemployment. So this was once again raised when Patna University was being formed. However, you cannot do policy acts with an intentionality that can only be imbued to the colonial rulers. Now, what happens is something very different. Now, what happens is that a modern sphere emerges in Patna, and this modern sphere combines the Muslim nobility, the Bengalis, and the Kayasthas. And the demand for Purna Swaraj, by the time the Congress begins to articulate the demand for Purna Swaraj, the demand for Purna Swaraj becomes a demand for our own university and our own High Court. The demand for Purna Swaraj and the Provincial Autonomy Act together become the rallying grounds for the Bihari intellectuals to ask for their own institutions. Now, these were not institutions of hate, perpetrating hate against the Bengalis. Once the Calcutta intellectuals understood what the colonial design was, it was the Calcutta University Vice-Chancellor who takes a very important lead in establishing the intellectual links with Patna University. And he's instrumental in getting Fani Bhushan Ganguly to become the principal for Patna Science College. Now, it's also important to understand that historians such as Jadunath Sarkar, at that point of time, Rabindranath Tagore was also establishing the Vishwa Bharati, and he invited Jadunath Sarkar to serve on the board for Vishwa Bharati. Jadunath and Rabindranath Tagore were great friends. In an exchange of letters between the two friends that is titled Bhai Hato Sakhyo, two friends write letters to each other. Jadunath writes to Rabindranath Tagore and says, Rabi, you are setting up a university. I agree. But your idea of the university is not what a university is. And I must move on, Rabi. And guess what becomes intellectual home to Jadunath Sarkar? Jadunath Sarkar then moves over to Patna, and Patna becomes the home for Jadunath Sarkar's intellectualism. Now, it's not just Jadunath Sarkar and history, the departments of languages. The most important feature of Patna University as it develops now is really, can we go back? This is not moving. Can we go back to the photo of Fani Bhushan Ganguly? Now, the most important part of Patna University as it develops at this point of time is that it is a multilingual university sphere. The Patna University had 4 official languages: English, Urdu, Bengali, and Maithili. Now, Maithili was our very own, the language of one of our regions, the language in which the poet laureate Vidyapati wrote over 3,000 pieces of poetry, which Rabindranath Tagore set to tune, many of which he translated. And one of his last theatrical performances happened in the area of Mithilanchal, but the British wouldn't allow the script of Maithili to be anointed any official status. So we were unlike in parts of India, such as Kerala, where you had a script, a language. In Karnataka, where an Akikaran movement would happen, we were people with many languages, but our own vernaculars, through acts of direct colonial control, not just Mithilakshar. Bhojpuri, most importantly, was denied its status as a script, and our textbooks, etc., were banned in schools in the Kaithi language, Bhojpuri, which was an important language. Now, at this point of time, there's also the ascendance of a movement in neighboring Allahabad, which says Urdu is messy. Hindi is such a good language. It's the clean language. This was a language that was meant to denigrate Urdu. Now, none of the flames of that movement could be seen anywhere near Patna, which continued to remain what is truly a multilingual sphere of the university. Now, Fani Bhushan Ganguly, who's a man of the sciences, his research was in physical chemistry, mainly in colloid chemistry. He works on silica gel, silicate solutions. The private sphere of his life, however, is that he is a fervent advocate of Urdu as a language. He continues to be the president of the Urdu Society. Now, the home of Fani Bhushan Ganguly becomes an important arena of debate between him and his wife. Fani Bhushan Ganguly favors Urdu and Qawwalis. His wife, who was educated at the Ravenshaw College in Orissa in undivided Bengal, practiced Ravindra Sangeet. Now, Fani Bhushan would say, oh, Ravindra Sangeet does not have a breadth. And she would say, oh, Qawwali is noise anyways. But the more important dialogue that happens is between Lady Imam, whose photographs I showed to you early enough. Now, Lady Imam and Fani Bhushan Ganguly meet at the quarters of the principal of Patna Science College. This is the height of the anti-imperial war. And Lady Imam, who was referred to as Lady Sahib, she's remembered as coming in Rolls Royce with Parda. But she also talks about higher education for women, including industrial education. Now, I've told you already that she fights the election, etc. The impact of these cultural practices is, and I'm going to end now, that the University Museum in Patna is home to important and original manuscripts such as the Ain-i-Akbari in the Naktalish script, the Malti Madhav in Mithilakshar, the Laila Majnu in Persian, and many manuscripts in Newari, which is Nepali. Patna also remained the examining center for Nepal for a very long time. Hindi is perfect, Urdu is messy. Rizwan Ahmad, Alok Rai, Francesca Orsini write, but here, Kalimuddin Ahmad would keep the tradition of criticism and Urdu writing alive, and Kalimuddin Ahmad's father's verses is what I want to end by. And he says, he brings in flavors of Maghi and Bhojpuri, the vernaculars whose scripts were banned by the British. And he writes, this is Azimuddin Ahmad, he writes at the height of the anti-imperial war, the poem with which I end is called Maut o Hayat, death, O death. Yahan na gulshan hai, na darya hai, na sehra koi. There is neither a flower garden, nor a large ocean, nor is there what you wear, the veil, the flower veil of the bridegroom. मौत वो खेल है जिसमें ना छीना झपटी होती कोई. So it's just a game and nobody is snatching things from each other. This is the war that he is criticizing. ना खुशी से मगर इस खेल को खेला कोई. So we have gone to this war of death, but we have all gone against. Na khushi is the term for unwillingly. We have no desire to go for it. जिंदगी के खेल के पर्दा का वो रुख है. And he says, we have nothing in our akhtiyar. We have nothing left to our agency. This is that part of our life. Zindagi ke parda ka wo rukh hai. Now this is the veil of the dead, the coffin cloth on the dead man. Now that dead man can lift up that veil and say, jisse jhaak kar apna tamasha dikhata hai koi. So you can lift up that veil and you can see the dance of this cruel life controlled by the colonial rulers. And that's what life has been left to be under the colonial masters. The imaginary of the Bihari, of course, continued to be in multiple linguistic traditions, which was very different from the University of Mysore. This had its successes and failures. I believe the success was that Bihar had been able to keep out the encroachments of the communal and the Hindi public sphere domination on a multilingual sphere. Where the weaknesses were, I feel in retrospect, that Mysore went up to discuss caste inequality much early on in its institutional history. The Bihari agricultural laborer, however, tilled the lands outside the university. It is that agricultural laborer who remains outside the university, and his imaginary now, neither the Urdu nor the Bengali nor the Maithili nor the Bhojpuri can incorporate. Can we build a new university from the ruins, which is still culturally plural and linguistically different? That's the imaginary with which I end. Thank you for the time.